Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of our podcast, AI ShowDown. Here today, we dive into a topic that sparks heated debates around the world, the impact of social media. In this episode, our two AIs will analyze and discuss the subject from their unique perspectives. Let the showdown begin.
Hey everyone, and welcome to a deep dive into the world of social media.
Oh yeah, this is a big one.
It really is. I mean, it feels like everywhere you turn, social media is there. It's in the headlines, it's in our homes, it's even, changing how we relate to each other.
And it's global too, right? It's not just like a local thing anymore. This is something that people around the world are grappling with.
Exactly. So how do we even begin to unpack something this massive? Well, we're going to try by looking at it from a few different angles. We've got some new data from the Pew Research Center, which is always fascinating. We'll be digging into a really insightful article from the American Psychological Association about the science behind how social media affects young people.
Which is so important because they're the ones growing up with this technology, shaping it and being shaped by it.
Absolutely. And because we want to look at the big picture, we'll also be pulling in some insights from the National Institutes of Health about the broader health implications of all of this.
Sounds like we've got our work cut out for us.
We do, but that's what these deep dives are all about.
Yeah.
So let's jump right in. The Pew Research Center recently did this massive study where they surveyed people from 27 countries all around the globe.
27 countries. Wow, that's impressive.
It's huge. And they were asking about the impact of social media on something pretty fundamental: democracy.
Now that's an interesting combination, social media and democracy. With all the talk these days about misinformation, echo chambers, political polarization, you'd think the results would be pretty bleak, right?
You'd think so, right?
Yeah.
But here's where things get interesting. The study actually found that in 20 of those 27 countries, a majority of people said they believe social media has actually benefited democracy in their country.
Wow, really? That's not what I would have expected. So in the majority of the countries surveyed, people are actually seeing a positive impact on democracy from social media. That's fascinating. Where were these countries? Were there any patterns there?
That's the really interesting part. It wasn't just one region or type of country. You saw this trend in places like Nigeria, Mexico, Indonesia. Even in countries with very different political systems and levels of economic development, there was this sense that social media was giving people a voice, a platform to be heard.
That makes sense. In a lot of places, social media might be the first time people have had access to a public forum like that. It's a way to bypass traditional media or even government censorship.
Exactly. And the study found that this was especially true in countries with a history of conflict or where trust in traditional institutions is low.
So in those contexts, social media can be a powerful tool for holding those in power accountable, for organizing protests, for demanding change.
It's like that old saying, the medium is the message. But in this case, it's almost like the medium is changing the message itself, at least how it's perceived.
It makes you wonder, though, why there's such a different conversation happening in other parts of the world, like here in the US.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Because the Pew study found that only about a third of Americans believe social media has been good for democracy. And in some European countries, the sentiment was even more negative.
So what's going on there? Is it just that we're more cynical? Or is there something else at play?
Well, it's probably a combination of factors, right? I mean, each country has its own unique relationship with social media, its own political climate, its own level of digital literacy.
And we can't forget about the role of the media itself, right? How social media is portrayed in the news and in popular culture can definitely shape how people perceive it.
For sure. It's like we always say, context is key. You can't just look at social media as this monolithic thing. You have to consider the specific historical, cultural, and political circumstances in which it's being used.
Absolutely. And one of the most important factors to consider is age, because the way young people are experiencing and shaping social media is fundamentally different from how older generations are using it.
It's like we're talking about two different worlds sometimes.
Right. Yeah, you've got the way adults tend to use social media, and then you've got how young people are using it, and it can feel like two completely different planets.
Right, and that's where I think this APA article is so valuable, because it goes beyond just the anecdotes or the think pieces and actually digs into the science behind how social media interacts with those young developing minds.
Yeah, and that's crucial because adolescence is already this time of massive change and upheaval, right? Even without social media, you've got all these hormonal shifts, these social pressures, this intense focus on identity formation.
It's like your brain is a construction zone.
Exactly. And then you throw social media into the mix with all of its instant gratification and social comparison and curated perfection, and it's no wonder that researchers are concerned about the potential impact.
So what is it about the adolescent brain that makes it particularly susceptible to the allure and, let's be honest, the potential pitfalls of social media?
Well, one key factor is this thing called hypersensitivity to social feedback, which basically means that teenagers' brains are wired to care a lot about what their peers think.
Okay, yeah, that tracks with my lived experience for sure.
Right, and it's not just some abstract teenage angst, it's actually rooted in neurobiology. During adolescence, the parts of the brain that process social information and rewards, like the amygdala and the ventral striatum, are going through this period of intense development.
So they're like extra sensitive to anything that makes them feel accepted or rejected, connected or excluded.
Exactly, and social media just amplifies all of that. It's like this giant feedback loop where every comment, every follower count is feeding into this primal need for social validation.
And that can be really tough to navigate, even for adults who supposedly have more developed prefrontal cortices. You know, the part of the brain that's supposed to help us make rational decisions and control our impulses.
Right, and the thing is with teenagers, those impulse control centers are still under construction. So they're literally wired to be more impulsive, more driven by immediate rewards, less able to think about the long-term consequences of their actions.
Which is kind of terrifying when you think about it, because social media is designed to be addictive, right? It's all about those little dopamine hits, those notifications that keep you coming back for more.
Absolutely. The infinite scroll, the push notifications, the constant stream of content, it's all engineered to keep you hooked. And for a developing brain that's already primed for that kind of reward-seeking behavior, it can be incredibly difficult to resist.
So we've got this perfect storm brewing, right? You've got these adolescent brains that are already wired to be extra sensitive to social feedback and driven by instant gratification. And then you drop them into this online world that's specifically designed to exploit those vulnerabilities.
It's a recipe for trouble, for sure. And that's why I think it's so important to be having these conversations about how to mitigate the risks while still allowing young people to benefit from the positive aspects of social media.
Because there are positive aspects, right? We don't want to just demonize the whole thing.
Absolutely. Social media can be an incredible tool for connection, for creativity, for finding your tribe, especially for kids who might be struggling with social anxiety or who feel like they don't quite fit in offline.
Right. It can be a lifeline for some kids. But the key is finding that balance between harnessing the good and mitigating the bad. And that's where things get really tricky. It feels like it's kind of a tightrope walk, right? You've got all this potential, but also all this risk.
Totally. And the stakes are high because we're talking about the social and emotional development of an entire generation.
No pressure, right?
Right. But seriously, this is where I think the APA article makes a really important point about the need for a multi-pronged approach. It's not just about putting the onus on parents to police their kids' screen time or on kids to just be more responsible online.
It's got to be bigger than that, right? Like a systemic kind of change.
Exactly. It's about changing the way social media platforms are designed in the first place. Like, what if instead of these addictive interfaces that keep you scrolling endlessly, these platforms were actually designed to promote digital well-being?
Okay, so you're talking about things like age-appropriate design, like they were talking about in the article.
Exactly. Imagine if platforms had built-in mechanisms to prevent excessive use or to flag potentially harmful content or to actually teach kids about digital literacy skills directly within the app.
So it's like instead of just throwing kids into the deep end of the pool, we're giving them some floaties and some swimming lessons.
Exactly. And it's not just on the tech companies either. Parents, educators, policymakers, we all have a role to play in creating a digital environment that's safer and healthier for young people.
And one that emphasizes those core values of empathy, critical thinking, and responsible online citizenship.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Now, speaking of the bigger picture, I want to circle back to something we touched on earlier about the broader health implications of social media. The NIH website had some interesting insights on this as well.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, we've been talking a lot about the mental and emotional impacts, but there are also potential physical health consequences to consider too, right? Things like sleep disruption, eye strains, sedentary behavior.
Exactly. And the NIH actually highlighted how social media use can affect sleep, which is something I think a lot of people can relate to.
Oh, totally. Who hasn't been kept up way too late scrolling through their phone, right?
Right. And those blue light emissions from our devices can actually interfere with our melatonin production, which makes it harder to fall asleep and stay asleep.
And it's not just the sleep deprivation. There's also research suggesting a link between heavy social media use and an increased risk of anxiety, depression, body image issues, even cyberbullying.
It's like this whole other layer of complexity on top of everything else we've been talking about.
It really highlights how interconnected all of these issues are. Physical health, mental health, social well-being, they're all intertwined, and social media has the potential to impact every single one of them.
Which brings us back to that question of balance, right? How do we mitigate the risks of social media without completely disconnecting from its potential benefits?
That's the million-dollar question, and I don't think there's an easy answer. But I do think it starts with awareness, with education, with having open and honest conversations about these issues with young people, and with demanding better from the tech companies that are shaping these digital spaces.
Because at the end of the day, social media is a tool, and like any tool, it can be used for good or for ill. It's up to us to decide how we're going to wield it.
Well said.
That's all the time we have for today's deep dive into the world of social media. It's been a fascinating and thought-provoking conversation, and I hope you'll join us next time for another exploration of the big questions shaping our world. Until then, stay curious, stay informed, and stay connected, but maybe put down your phone every once in a while and connect with the world offline too.
You're tuned in to 2 AI ShowDown, where 2 AI minds dive deep into the hottest topics in the digital world. First up, they'll tackle the highs and lows of online dating. Is swiping left and right ruining our ability to connect? Or is it just the new way to find love? And then get ready as they break down those intense real-life debates. From ghosting horrors to the gender divide in dating app experiences, our 2 AI experts will spar it out with wit and wisdom. Stay tuned, because it's time for 2 AI ShowDown, where the sparks fly and no topic is off limits.
Hey everyone, so today we're going deep, really deep into something that's kind of unsettling, honestly. We're talking about the dark side of social media.
Yeah, I mean, we all know it's not all sunshine and rainbows out there, but...
Right, we see the headlines, but we're going beyond that.
Exactly. We've got some firsthand accounts, and they're pretty intense. Really paint a picture of how these online connections, the ones we're always told are so great, can actually turn toxic.
Yeah, and what's really got me thinking is that these aren't just, random stories. These are real people, like you and me, whose lives have been deeply impacted.
And that's what we really want to drive home in this deep dive. It's not just about abstract ideas or statistics. It's about the human cost of this dark side of social media.
Exactly. So we're going to be sharing a couple of these experiences, and well, the first one, it really hits home. It's about this woman, Carla, who reached out to us about her younger sister, Marta. Imagine, pre-pandemic Marta, life of the party, always upbeat, the type.
Everyone knows a Marta.
Right, but then lockdown happened, and like a lot of us, Marta's online life just kind of exploded, and that's where things took a turn.
And this is where it gets really tricky, because on the surface, it all seems so innocent. But what we have to understand is the role these algorithms play.
Algorithms, right. We hear that word all the time, but...
Exactly. It's like this buzzword. But what does it really mean? Think of it like this. An algorithm is basically a system, a formula, that determines what you see online. It's tracking every single click, every comment you make, and then it uses that information to decide what to show you next.
So it's personalized, but in a way that we don't really control.
Right. And the thing is, these algorithms, they're designed to keep you engaged, to keep you scrolling. And sometimes that means feeding you more and more of what they think you want, even if it's not necessarily good for you.
So in Marta's case, she was really into healthy living, smoothies, yoga, that whole thing.
Right. And so the algorithm picks up on this and starts showing her more and more content related to health and wellness, which again, on the surface seems harmless, right?
Yeah.
But here's where it gets dangerous. Online, these algorithms, they can take things to the extreme.
They take the healthy living and crank it up to 11.
Exactly. So instead of getting balanced, evidence-based information, Marta's feed starts getting flooded with increasingly extreme diet advice, unrealistic body images, and even some pretty dangerous health hacks. And this is where the term echo chamber comes into play.
Echo chamber, so you're surrounded by voices that are all saying the same thing.
Precisely. It's like being in a room where every single sound you hear just reinforces what you already believe, even if it's not true or healthy. And that's what happened with Marta. The algorithm created this echo chamber around her interest in health and wellness, and it just kept getting louder and more intense.
And Carla, her own sister, she's seeing all of this happening, right? Like, she's got to know something's up.
You would think so, right? But here's the thing. Social media, it creates this illusion of closeness. We see people's posts, their pictures, and we think we know what's going on in their lives.
But it's like we're only seeing the highlight reel, right?
Exactly. And sadly, with Marta, it wasn't until things reached a crisis point, until she was hospitalized with a severe eating disorder, that the true extent of the problem became clear.
It's scary, you know? Like, we joke about social media, but this is someone's sister, someone's daughter, and it just took over.
It's a chilling reminder that those algorithms, they don't care if you're starting from a good place, like Marta with her health kick. It can still go really wrong.
So what do we even do? Like, if someone's listening, worried about their own sister, their kid, are there signs to watch for? Like, how bad does it have to get?
It's tough because it's subtle at first. One thing I always tell people is look for a narrowing. Like, did the person used to be into all sorts of stuff, but now it's just this one topic all the time.
Okay, so like their whole feed is just that one thing, whatever it is.
Exactly. And it might seem harmless, but that intense focus, it can be a sign that they're in that echo chamber, just hearing the same stuff over and over.
And that's when it gets dangerous, right? Because they're not getting the full picture anymore.
Right. And another thing is look at the tone. Are they getting more negative, more, I don't know, aggressive maybe, towards people who disagree?
Oh yeah, like those arguments you see online that just get really heated really fast.
Exactly. That us versus them mentality, that's a huge red flag. It means they're not just interested in the topic anymore. They're starting to see the world through that lens, and that can be really hard to come back from.
Man, it's heartbreaking, honestly. And this is making me think about the other story we have from Lewis. Because his nephew, Daniel, he was getting into politics, right?
Right, which again, totally normal, especially for a young person, right?
Yeah.
Trying to figure out the world.
Exactly. But like Marta and her health stuff, Daniel's interest in politics, it kind of took a dark turn, didn't it?
Yeah, he stumbled into these online forums, groups, and the content just got more and more extreme. You know, at that age, it's easy to get swept up in that kind of thing.
Totally. Like, teenagers, they're looking for a place to belong, to be part of something, and these online groups, they can be really seductive.
And the algorithms, they know this. They see a young person engaging with this content, and they just keep feeding it to them. It's like the more extreme, the better, as far as the algorithm is
As far as
concerned.
it keeps them hooked, right. That's all the algorithm cares about, engagement.
Exactly. And so you have Daniel, who's already at a vulnerable age, trying to figure out who he is and what he believes, and he's being bombarded with this really intense, often misleading information.
And his family, like, are they picking up on this? Or is it like with Marta, where they don't realize how bad it is until it's too late?
It's tough because teenagers, especially, they can be really good at hiding things. But Louis did start noticing some changes in Daniel. He was becoming withdrawn, isolating himself from his family and friends. His grades started slipping, and he was having these angry outbursts that were really out of character for him.
It's like they're already going through so much, and then you add this whole other layer of online chaos on top of it.
And in Daniel's case, it reached a breaking point, unfortunately.
Lewis reached out to us because Daniel, he actually attempted suicide.
Yeah, it's
Wow.
It really underscores the seriousness of this, you know? This isn't just kids being online too much. It can have devastating real-world consequences.
Absolutely. And I think that's what's so scary for people, right? Like, where's the line? How do we even begin to, I don't know, get a handle on this?
Well, and I think it's important to acknowledge we don't want to demonize social media entirely.
Right. It's not all L.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It can be an incredible tool for connection, for learning, even for positive social change. But like any tool, you have to know how to use it safely.
So it's more about, like, being smart about it, not just letting it run wild.
It's exactly. We need to be way more discerning about what we consume online, who we follow. It's about diversifying those feeds, you know, getting different perspectives, and honestly, being willing to challenge our own biases.
Because if we're only ever seeing stuff we already agree with, that's when we get stuck, right?
So it's the echo chamber, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's where media literacy comes in, big time. We've got to get better ourselves, and especially young people, at evaluating information online.
So not just taking everything at face value, really thinking about it.
Right. Like how to spot fake news, how to recognize bias. These are essential skills now.
It's like taking back control of our own feeds, our own minds almost.
I like that, yeah. It's not about abandoning social media, it's about engaging with it actively, consciously.
Yeah. Wow, this has been a lot. Carla and Luis's stories, they're a lot to process, but really important to hear. So as we're kind of wrapping up here, what's the one thing you really want listeners to take away from all of this?
I think the biggest thing is, we can't be passive. This digital world, it impacts all of us, whether we realize it or not. So being mindful of our own use, talking to our kids, even pushing for more accountability from these tech companies, it all matters.
It's like we're all in this together, right? Even if it doesn't always feel like it.
Exactly. We have more power than we think.
Yeah.
But we have to use it.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, this has been honestly a tough conversation, but a necessary one. Big thanks to Carla and Luis for sharing their experiences, and to all of you listening, thank you for being here. We'll see you next time, and until then, stay curious out there.